'Tis the season to get spooky. My friends, thank you all for stopping by. This is Unnecessary Rambling. I am Brandon Sylvia. Today we're talking about survival horror, and we're talking about a topic, a discussion point that I had been wanting to dive into for a while. I have been thinking about this. It's been floating around in my head as I'm seeing these remakes and rumors of returning franchises and Resident Evil doing so well and all these different things that have made me come to the conclusion that I think we're returning to a golden age, a golden era for survival horror. A lot of people look at the late 90s or mid 90s into the mid 2000s as probably the golden decade, if you will, for survival horror. I think that's pretty much unanimous across the board. Who knows if we'll ever eclipse that. That was such a special time. But I think we're possibly, if I have a case that I'm going to make here, I'm going to lay it out for you, and you can let me know in the comments if you think I'm crazy, but I have a case that we're going to lay out. We're going to go over some scenarios that could make this modern era of survival horror, this ninth generation, could it possibly be a new golden era for survival horror? And I think it very well could be. So let's go ahead and not ramble on any longer. I have a bunch of different points that we're going to go through, and different categories that I have games in that we're going to talk about, and different scenarios that we're going to talk about. The first thing off the bat, when you're building your fantasy football team, when you're starting a franchise, you want that quarterback one, that starting quarterback to kick everything off, and the success of that quarterback, the success, if you're in basketball, of that point guard, baseball, of the pitcher, whatever. It's going to be a ripple effect. However they do is typically going to follow however the team does. And for that, in survival horror, it's obviously Resident Evil. Resident Evil is the quarterback of survival horror. It's the renaissance we're seeing with, all these remakes and returning franchises. None of that happens if it's not for the success of the Resident Evil remakes, if it's not for the success of RE7, RE8, and ongoing into, RE4, 2023, and whatever the hell else we get from Capcom from that point on. But talking about golden ages for survival horror, you gotta say we're in another golden age for Resident Evil. We're starting at 2017 with RE7. We're already into 2024, and we've had almost annually releases for games with not one miss yet. And assuming they stay the course with Resident Evil 4 and going on, they still have some stuff, Code Veronica, Resident Evil 1, they can remake a remake. They have Outbreak that they could go to. And beyond that, we know that this is the end of the Winter Saga. We've talked about that before on the channel. I'm not the biggest fan of the Winter Saga. Where do they go from here after that? That creates such interesting possibilities. Resident Evil 9 is a blank slate. They can go back to iconic characters, create brand new characters, introduce them to the franchise. What do they do with spinoffs? Does Revelations return? Do we get, some Leon Revelations games? Do we get a friggin' Operation Ada or standalone campaigns for characters to flesh out their backstory a little bit more? Like, the possibilities are endless, and I really would like those type of things, to have standalone stories, Resident Evil stories that are, introducing mainline characters, important characters, and giving them their own kind of spin-off game. It, doesn't have to be anything all that substantial. 3-4 hours getting to explore a little bit more of these characters, just even in between moments. I'd like to see certain missions that Ada had taken on. Like, we know that she worked with Wesker, she worked with the dude, and RE6, I forget his damn name, the dude with the little goatee. But how did she come to prominence to become like the top ranking spy that people would contract for? Like, what are those origins missions that she had to take on? And you could do interesting different things. Have a kind of like RE6 where Ada's stuff was a little bit more stealth based. Have a solo campaign, Operation Ada, if you want to call it that, where it's more stealth based, focused on her and exploring her backstory a little bit more. Like, there's just so many possibilities with Resident Evil right now, especially after RE4. It's a total, blank slate, and that could be that's where you can begin an argument saying, okay, well, this is dangerous territory. If you're Resident Evil Capcom blank slate, that could be where things begin to get off the rails. And sure, there's an argument that could be made there, but I think with their track record since 2017, you would have to at least think that for, let's just say, the next 4 to 5 years at the very least, Resident Evil is on a stable trajectory. So they're QB1, they're stable, they're doing good. That immediately puts the rest of survival horror in a good spot. So we go down. If you got to have your quarterback one, you got to have your staples. You got to have the reliables. You got to have the people on the team in your franchise. You're if you're an employer, you got to have reliable employees. These are the staples. And right now, I think there's no better staple for survival horror or for horror. You can argue if it's survival horror or not. And it's not a game, it's just a team, Supermassive. They've been dedicated to survival horror since 2015 with Until Dawn. And since then, damn near, when they started the Dark Pictures, it's literally been yearly releases of those games. Man of Medan 2019, Little Hope 2020, House of Ashes 21, The Devil in Me 22, and all but one of those games, in my opinion, has been thoroughly enjoyable. And then The Devil in Me looks to be thoroughly enjoyable as well, while expanding what they do. They're introducing puzzle solving mechanics, introducing, inventory slots that you're having to manage, and they're slowly finding ways to do what they do best and also innovate at the same time. That's a dangerous recipe for that team to I'm not saying that they can break out into a Capcom level or anything. It's not even remotely the same scale, but it is to say that this is a team that I do think the potential is through the roof for Supermassive and for what they can do in the horror game space. Another one that I would say is a staple, and it's hard to say because they've only put out 2 games, and I'm not even sure necessarily if we're going to get a third because the second game I don't believe performed all that well. But you would have to say The Evil Within. And it very well could be that we don't get a third game. But when I think about Game Pass, and I think about a service that is constantly in need of new content, and I think about a user base of 25, 30 million people, I really do think something like The Evil Within could perform optimally in a service like that, because you're asking people to pay whatever full price $60 for what is it didn't seem to get the critical love that I personally have for those games. But whenever it's quote unquote free on a service and it's a 7 out of 10 by whatever most outlets out there, people don't really care about that type of stuff. And so then you really can develop that huge cult following where, to me, those games at the very worst, I would say The Evil Within 1's like a 8.5. Like, I think those are some of the best survival horror games ever made if you're a legit fan of survival horror. I think that, just your average Joe who likes action adventure games, they go into something like The Evil Within 1, like that's going to be such a turnoff. And I do absolutely understand that, but giving that type of game, and I think the Evil Within 2 was expansive to the point where it could allow for a new fan base who isn't as familiar with survival horror, with, introducing open world elements and all these different things that were more approachable and accessible, feeling a little bit more like The Last of Us. You give that type of game to an audience for quote unquote free, the success that could have is immense. And once again, Microsoft, Xbox needing to constantly update that service, that subscription service. I would think that at some point we should probably get a third Evil Within game. And another thing that lends some kind of possibility for this occurring is that Ghostwire Tokyo was initially going to be the Evil Within 3. So that right there tells me that there was at least plans for the Evil Within 3 at some point. Okay, so next staple is Outlast. And Outlast 1, a great game. I haven't played the second one yet, but Outlast Trials coming 2023 looks to be a little bit more in the way of you're getting more to do with combat, so there's a little bit more gameplay than just, running and hiding, which is interesting. Would love to see how that materializes. Outlast is interesting because similar to the Evil Within, they went on a little bit of a hiatus there. And it's very much going to depend on how this next game does. But regardless, it's been for, the last generation, one of the few staples for survival horror. And next up, a staple that I would say has been consistent in the horror game space since the PlayStation 2 days is just, once again, another developer, Remedy. And we know that Alan Wake 2 is in the works. We know there's 2 Control games in the works, one like mainline game and one spin-off game. I would absolutely say that Control is a horror game bar none. Like, throughout the entire game, there's a horror undertone consistently throughout the entire runtime. Very creepy, very cerebral. It's, definitely an action-adventure game with a psychological horror flair to it. And that is, with Control 2, Alan Wake 2, Remedy is going to have a huge presence with survival horror this generation. And even when you get into something like Max Payne, which they're remaking, very, very dark undertones throughout that entire series. 3, a little bit less in the, 3 was, I would say, less horror, still very dark, a little bit less horror maybe, but still, regardless, a series that's incredibly dark. So Remedy, I would say, sure, they may not be straight up survival horror, but they are absolutely horror adjacent. They love playing in the horror space, so they're a staple for the genre. I would say they have to, once again, and what we're talking about here with the Evil Within, with Outlast, with Remedy, these staples have to be here and they have to be present and hitting at a good consistency, a good cadence for this for this survival horror golden era agenda that I'm trying to push. For that to work, these things have to be present. And one of the biggest staples for survival horror with the last generation was The Last of Us. And there's so many question marks surrounding The Last of Us that I almost didn't even put it on this list because I don't know what place it's going to have in the 9th generation. I don't even know if it will pop up other than with Factions 2 in this, this generation. But there is still that part of me where it's like it's selling very, very well. Maybe not as well as Sony would like for their flagship title to sell. It's not hitting God of War, it's not hitting Spider-Man numbers, and that does seem to be the game that Sony gets behind the most. So sure, I can understand some frustration there, but even with, I believe they're at like 12 million total sales right now, I could be wrong on that, for The Last of Us Part 2, that's still damn good regardless. So, maybe you scale back a little bit. Maybe you don't put fucking $300 million into the game, and you could probably do that, and fans would be happy to not play whatever 40 fucking hours of The Last of Us 2. But regardless, I don't mean to sit here and shit on The Last of Us. I love The Last of Us, and I would like to see it return. I would hope that maybe it returns, and I love the bleak, dark nature, but good God, man, they drug that shit out. It was like, just dragging your damn corpse through glass for 40 hours. But regardless, I don't mean to continuously rant against The Last of Us. I really do love that franchise, and it has been a true staple for the survival horror genre, and I do think that it elevates the genre and inspires other games like The Evil Within 2 to match that same type of cinematic touch and stealth-based action. And just, yeah, the Last of Us has been totally inspirational and revolutionary for many developers out there. So I do not want to take away from that at all. State of Decay 3, or just in general, State of Decay, an absolute staple for survival horror last generation. Then we get into State of Decay 3, a game that's being built on Unreal Engine 5, a game that has the Coalition coming in and helping Undead Labs. Like, what does that concoction end up creating? Do we end up getting the resource management, the hardcore survival elements of State of Decay, but blending that with visceral, solid, third-person shooting, hard-hitting, great gameplay? Obviously with Unreal Engine 5, they have some focus on visuals. They're trying to expand in that realm and trying to do something different in that realm to just be more impressive visually, have better character models, and just overall world visuals. I for sure, that's going to be present. But my biggest thing is the Coalition there to, of course, they're there to assist them with Unreal Engine 5, since they've been playing with that for a while now, and they've been like one of the main teams behind that. But I would love to see State of Decay 3 with a more Last of Us feeling gameplay system. It doesn't have to be that visceral or that in-depth, but just something a little bit more responsive and satisfying to mess around with, so that moment-to-moment action, it doesn't feel like a hindrance, and it can accompany the resource management, the base building, all of those things. If the gameplay can accompany that, then State of Decay 3 absolutely has the potential to be like the real breakout survival horror title this generation. Okay, and the last staple that I have for this category is the indies. And we have seen the emergence of indie survival horror at such a great level over this last generation. When you're talking about, Those Who Remain and Remothered and The Sinking City and Call of Cthulhu and Made of Scare, and there's just been so many solid ass independent horror games over the last generation, and it's looking like the same will remain into the 9th generation. As of right now, we have titles like Grey Hill Incident on the horizon, which is for sure one of the more unique takes, or I shouldn't even say more unique takes. It's just a concept that is not explored often at all in the game space, and that's an alien invasion, where that's the main angle for the game. People are being abducted. You're having all of these UFO sightings, and it's a story-driven first-person game, which, that's not an uncommon theme with a lot of the indie titles. But that hook, that twist of giving you a alien invasion that you're up against, that is immediately different and intriguing, and I think that's the thing to keep your eye on with this generation. that these indies, they're getting to a point now where it's not enough to have the atmosphere, the jump scares, the kind of horror and the tension. They need unique concepts. So they're having to elevate their game to the next level, and you're getting things like Grey Hill Incident. You're getting things like Pacific Drive, which the developers are calling a road like, which is absolutely fucking hilarious. But it sounds like you are in this game trying to reach some destination while avoiding this kind of supernatural world ending style of storm or disaster. And in the trailer, you're seeing lightning strike all over the place. You're seeing what appears to be acid rain and weird shit popping out of the ground trying to block your path. And then they have like this kind of garage hub area where you go and you take your car to customize it and upgrade, and that kind of allows you to battle the terrain that you're facing in the game. And it's just very much all about new features, new mechanics, and that is something I have never seen before in a game. So a roguelike where you're just essentially this driving simulator roguelike style of avoiding disaster game. I don't really know the right way to put my finger on it, but it's very unique. It's very fresh. You're getting shit like The Chant, which is releasing in November of this year, and it's like this cult horror game where you are, I believe, escaping a cult. And similar to the alien invasion stuff, is that new in most like fictional horror realms? Not really, but in the game space, not much in the way for cult horror games, not much in the way for alien invasion horror games. So new concepts, absolutely something that I am very much keeping my eye on for, you know, the indies and the horror games developed in the indie space this coming generation. Even things like very off the wall bizarre projects like that Fort Solace game that has Troy Baker and Roger Clark. The Troy Baker being the dude who voiced Joel from The Last of Us, Roger Clark being the dude who voiced Arthur Morgan from Red Dead Redemption 2. There's this horror project that they're involved with, a space sci-fi kind of set on Mars, very narrative focused independent horror project that they're involved with. And then you're like, how the hell does an indie team get Roger Clark and Troy Baker and have these great character models and great visuals? And that's for sure something I'm curious about as well. I wonder if there's any sort of funding, Microsoft, Sony funding it behind. I really have no idea, and I'm not trying to speculate there, but the idea of that, of indie teams working with really talented people, focusing in highly on visuals and storytelling and seeing what they can come up with there. And I don't think like that's a game that's going to get a ton of gameplay or anything like that. I think it is going to be very much a story focused experience. But once again, the indies coming through as a staple. Even shit like that Deathground game, pretty much giving us what Capcom won't freaking give us with Dino Crisis. And I know it's first person, more of a survival based game, and it remains to be seen what that ends up being. But a horror or an indie team working on a dinosaur horror game, that's the thing, man. That is going to be the thing with this coming generation. Keep your eye on the indies. Keep your eye on the creative shit they're doing in the horror space, because I'm telling you, the days of like just the straight up walking simulators, tense atmosphere where you're just roaming around a house, I think those days are gone. And I think these indies are moving on to more creative, unique projects. And so just definitely something to keep your eye on with the indies becoming, and I think they already were a huge factor in the revitalization of horror in the 8th generation, but I think they're going to be an even larger factor for the 9th generation. If what, you know, my agenda here that I'm trying to push is that we're heading into a golden era, and for us to return to a golden era of survival horror, the indies have to be hitting these games. You know, the Grey Hill Incident, the Chant, the Pacific Drive, these games have to hit at a high clip. So, And I think they will. They look very damn interesting. So they are the last for the staples. All right. And the next thing we're going to dive into are the returning stars. And as we were talking about earlier, talking about with Resident Evil coming back, having huge success, and a lot of publishers starting to get starry-eyed in those boardroom meetings going, oh shit, we have a lot of dormant IP that we could give the RE2 remake treatment to and then get it out there and sell millions and millions of copies. And look, and I'm not like saying that as a negative at all. I'm very, very glad that Resident Evil 2 and those remakes were able to inspire some of these publishers with these dormant horror IP to revive them and remake them. And the biggest one of all is Silent Hill. And it's one that we're, not 100% sure about yet. So this could have easily fell to the necessary returns category. But Silent Hill, it's all but confirmed that we're going to be getting the Silent Hill 2 remake from Bloober. And I'm excited for that. Don't get me wrong. I definitely think Bloober can possibly deliver on that if they can just find a way to, work in combat in somewhat of a, at least kind of average level of quality. But if 2 is being remade, then 1 has to be remade somewhere. It has to be in the works somewhere right now. I just don't see a world where Silent Hill 2 gets remade, but 1 doesn't. Like with Resident Evil 2, the only reason RE2 got remade and 1 wasn't remade on the PS4 is because 1 was remade on the GameCube. So like, I do think there is, like we talked about earlier, a reason to remake RE1 remake at this point, but it's like with Silent Hill 1, you can't remake 2 before 1, in my opinion. I just think that would be so bizarre. So you're looking at like your Blue Points, you're looking at these different teams who could absolutely deliver on Silent Hill 1, a remake, if they're licensing Silent Hill out to different developers, which I'm assuming Konami is, if Bloober and the other one is Annapurna with their short stories. Supposedly Annapurna is developing these like episodic short stories in the Silent Hill universe. And I don't know if that's Silent Hill Sakura or what connection that is there, but there's all these leaks of these different Silent Hill games floating around. So where there's smoke, there's usually fire, and there's just so much smoke here. I don't want to jump the gun and say it's like a 100% certainty, because I don't believe anything's 100% until we see it officially revealed, and even then shit gets canceled all the time. So like until we get our hands on it, it's never 100% certain. But I would say with all the caveats there, this is about as close as you can get to what I would say is an absolute that we will be seeing Silent Hill return in some form or fashion. Another returning star is Alone in the Dark, what a lot of people would consider the OG for survival horror. I know, like, you have Sweet Home on the NES, and then like there's that debate there, but Alone in the Dark was kind of the most popular early survival horror game, and returning with a very similar to that RE2 over the shoulder kind of perspective. It looks a little bit janky, but granted, it's kind of early on in development. We probably won't see this until late 2023, early 2024 before it releases, but giving them credit, they did show gameplay, and it looked solid enough. I think the tone and the very, very creepy kind of story details in that trailer sold me way more than the gameplay. So they can just iron out that gameplay a little bit. We have something really special on our hands there with, and I think just more so than it just returning and being a great game, I think it's saying something about the OG coming back into the horror game space, returning now. I think it just bodes well and looks well for the overall state of survival horror if we're going to hit that golden age, that new golden age that I'm trying to push here. And we also have one that is returning very, very soon, and that is Dead Space 1, coming to us January of 2023. And this, to me, it's so much bigger than just Dead Space. This, to me, is a sign that, let's just say this does really well. You have EA, a team with limitless amounts of money, and if something like Dead Space does well, what does that mean for future brand new survival horror IP at EA? An EA funded AAA survival horror brand new IP that I'm not EA Motive can go on, do Dead Space 2 or Dead Space 4, however they end up working that out. They have so many studios, so many talented studios. They can bring in new talent. Like the possibilities of what EA could do with a brand new survival horror IP if Dead Space does well, that's the most interesting thing here. And also, of course, a not necessarily a reboot, but a sequel to Dead Space 3, or even a reboot of the franchise from that point on. So you start like a whole new saga. And even if you do go into Dead Space 4, but you have like different story beats or however you want to lay that out, just having a continuation of the Dead Space franchise and not just remake after remake, that is incredibly, incredibly compelling. So it's not just what this remake means in the immediate future, but what does it mean throughout the entire generation? What does this spawn down the road? Those are the compelling things to keep your eye on. And so I hope Dead Space does well for that reason and that reason alone. And last on the list for returning stars, we have Fatal Frame. And Fatal Frame, it popped back up onto the scene with a remaster of Maiden of Blackwater in 2021. Now they're back on the scene with another remaster for Mask of the Lunar Eclipse, coming to us early 2023. So what that tells me, once again, it's so much bigger than just these one-off games. It's for the IP in general, for the franchise in general. What does all this mean? Usually developers who go into the bag, revive dormant franchises for a remaster. They're usually doing that to test the water to see if the market is responding to it, if it's something that the market wants. And then at that point, that's when they get into reviving the franchise with brand new titles, brand new releases for the franchise. Those are the things that are the most compelling to me. So I'm hoping, once again, Dead Space Remake, I'm hoping it does well so that we can get more Dead Space continued on past 3. I'm hoping that these Fatal Frame remasters do well so we can get more brand new entries into the Fatal Frame series. Okay, and then we get into what I would consider to be absolutely the most important factor in this equation, and that is the new IP. When you're getting into a new generation, I think it's all about the new games in that generation. What new is coming onto the scene and making survival horror relevant? And I think at the top of that list for everybody is the Callisto Protocol. This is my most anticipated game of 2022. I think it looks unbelievable. The shit that they're doing with, the mutations where you're having to dismember every part of the monster's body, or otherwise they will grow these vile, disgusting mutations that become even more powerful. And then just, the weird bobbing and weaving as if you're in a Fight Night game, or the sliding down the water chutes and getting eviscerated by the damn fan that's got you, all your damn organs spinning, and it looks so disgustingly beautiful. I'm absolutely on board for that day one. I think it's just, I cannot wait to see what Glenn Schofield and that team are whipping up, along with the fact that they're trying to lean into the narrative beats, and that's something different. Horror does not typically do all that well with narrative, so let's see if they can hit that out of the park, as well as all the awesome gameplay mechanics and just the visceral nature of the combat. So eagerly anticipating that, and I think that has all the potential in the world for becoming a huge mainstay in this genre. I think it can become just epic. And we also have Hideo Kojima's new survival horror game, Overdose. Who knows what the hell this is? Who knows when the hell it'll come out? All we know is it's supposed to have Margaret Qualley from fucking, oh shit, what is the name of that movie? Brad Pitt, Leo, the Manson family. What the, holy shit, I'm drawing a total blank. Hollywood, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Wow, that's weird. I freaking love that movie. Don't know fucking what, my brain doesn't work sometimes. Anyways, it's supposed to have Margaret Qualley in it as the main lead, and of course Death Stranding. She's from Death Stranding as well, but regardless, she's supposed to be the main character in the game, and it's supposed to be a third person horror game. I believe that this could possibly be the game that is exclusive to Xbox. I could be wrong on some of these things here, but I believe there was a rumor of this being attached to the cloud, and so this might be a smaller title. You know, this might be a much smaller scale title, 3-4 hours, a little cloud game. But regardless, having Hideo Kojima back in the horror space after all the big debacle with Konami and PT and Silent Hills and all that, but I'm just happy to have him back, potentially, hopefully, working in the horror space. So, Overdose, Hideo Kojima, this has the potential either which way to be something remarkable or something that's just kind of like a small little, smaller scale game. Now, the next IP is one that, once again, we don't know much about, and I don't even know from what we saw if I would consider this a horror game at all, and that is Pragmata. This is coming from Capcom, and I do believe that this is one of their only like fully next gen games in development. And it from the initial kind of glance when you first look at it, you go, okay, a Dead Space style game. And then you're like, I don't know. They seem to be really leaning into the characters and this idea of leaving Earth behind, and what exactly is going on here. It does have a very dystopic vibe to it. Maybe even this post-human angle that they may be working in as like the character, the girl character, as she's like floating out into outer space, you see her eye sort of like do this almost digital, it has like this digital gaze over her eyes where it's almost like her eye becomes like a programming tool or some shit. It has like a grid over her eyeball. It just really, really weird shit. I don't know if it is some sort of post-humanist style of story. Is post-humanist even a word? I don't know, but I don't know if it's a post-human based plotline or if it's a post-apocalyptic based plotline or really what's going on with the story, but I'm just so compelled by that, and it absolutely does have, like I said, that dystopic quality that lends itself well to survival horror. So interested to see what comes of that. And last but certainly not least on the list, Toyama's return to horror with Slitterhead. I watched a full Q&A. I actually watched a bunch of shit on the Boca Game Studios YouTube channel where they dive into, with the Q&A, they dive into kind of like their idea for Slitterhead. And it doesn't sound as much to me as like a straight up survival horror game, which could be good or bad in different instances. They're sounding like they want to make it accessible and they want to kind of have a more action tone or a more action adventure at the very least tone to it. The only thing with Slitterhead that has me slightly worried is he said he wants to make it available or approachable to like younger audiences. And that made me go, oh, what does that mean? Because I just don't think horror can really be done well with like a E rating, or usually not even like a T rating. You know, if you're going to be expressive and explore darker, just darker subject matter, then you want to have an M rating for that. So that's the only thing that left me going, oh man, what does that exactly mean? But the idea of having a more fast-paced action style of combat system along with just persistent tension throughout the game, that's absolutely compelling to me. And then there's just so much good shit on that YouTube channel. I definitely recommend checking it out. Toyama and Shinji Mikami sat down and did like an interview style thing or just a conversation, sat there and they were drinking and talked about like their early inspiration and how Toyama was inspired by Resident Evil 1. And Shinji Mikami was talking about working with the original creator of Sweet Home and how they kind of took that formula and modernized it in 1996 and was able to keep the essence of having that kind of key based gameplay loop where it's all about getting the item that progresses you to the next story moment. And just real good shit that they like. At one point Shinji Mikami was talking about how he sees the least of himself in Resident Evil 4, and I'm like, wow, that's a very interesting insight. But yeah, they have one. I haven't watched the full thing on the Shuhei Yoshida interview yet, but they just had Shuhei Yoshida on that channel, and I'm definitely gonna finish watching that up as well. Just real good content over there. I'll link in the description to their channel. Just great shit. I'm sure most of you would love to check it out if you haven't. But yeah, just having the original creator of Silent Hill back in the game space with Slitterhead and a very talented team over there. We don't know much, but from that trailer, it is very apparent that they're going for that full on, at least visually, full on horror with the enemy design. So at least with that, you can kind of take a sigh of relief and go, okay, well, they're staying true to the essence of horror at the very least with the enemy design. So yeah. And I'm actually going to throw one more on here for the new IP. I just thought of this. Assassin's Creed Hexe. And I know people are like, you absolute phony, but hear me out. I think with a game as accessible as something like Assassin's Creed, and universally kind of known and a household name, at least in the gaming space, having a horror-based kind of witch trials, witchcraft sort of based Assassin's Creed game, I mean, I can't imagine if that's good. Can you imagine the influence that can have and the influx of new fans looking to get those experiences elsewhere? And it's kind of like their introduction into horror. They dip their toe in a little bit. They're like, damn, I like these vibes. I like the music. I like the tone. I like the atmosphere. Then they dip a little bit deeper. They go into the Resident Evils. And then they just start sifting around and finding what else is available in this genre. That is very important for creating a golden age of survival horror. So I'm going to shout out to Assassin's Creed Hexe. I don't think it'll come out to probably 2026, 2027, but maybe even like, honestly, shit, that might not even be this generation if we think about it. Because we have Mirage 2023, we have Codename Red probably 2025, and then, yeah, Hexe will probably be 2027, which PS5 Series X released in 2020. I think this generation will probably span longer, probably go into 2030, 2032-ish. I could see it being a 10, 12-year console generation, especially as technology is, or at least like graphical leaps aren't as drastic as they once were. I don't see the need to jump out of this generation anytime soon. I could be wrong. I'm not a tech guy. Okay, and last topic we're going to dive into are the necessary returns. These games, these franchises have to return this generation for this generation to be a golden age, a new golden age for survival horror. First one is Dino Crisis. And I think that this is so important for one, just the simple fact of a third-person shooter where you are a third-person survival horror shooter where the main enemy is a dinosaur is just so important to have. It really is just that simple. But I would say the fact that Capcom has talked about wanting to revive their classic franchises, I just don't see many classic franchises that Capcom has on offer that is more requested than Dino Crisis. So like, it's kind of one of those things where if it's a possibility, we have to get it done. There's all the rumor of Dino Crisis coming to PS Plus for October. We should know that sometime soon. We might even know that by the time this video comes out. But if that happens, if it's available to buy, we got to go out there and buy it to show Capcom we want this shit back. And Yeah, Dino Crisis, if it's possible to return, it has to return. It's the most interesting concept when it comes to enemy design. It's the one that stands out the most, where it's like that's the only place you can really go and battle dinosaurs in a Resident Evil-esque manner. Just so freaking epic. Has to come back. Second game that has to come back is Parasite Eve. Square has a lot of crazy shit going on. They're definitely in limbo right now. I could easily see 2023 being the year that Square Enix is bought totally. But a role-playing survival horror game is something that we are absolutely vacant. There are zero available right now. And there's, survival horror game with like minimal role-playing elements, but a real role-playing survival horror title is something that we absolutely have to have on the market. And just to think about what could be done with a Parasite Eve remake and or a reboot would maybe even be what I would prefer, to like introduce new little dialogue options, like all the modern touches for role-playing games with Parasite Eve, and the little city locations that you're able to explore in the first game. Imagine being able to kind of drive through those. Just little city blocks that you're going to. Nothing too crazy, nothing too elaborate, nothing too expansive, just little city blocks that you're able to drive around to. Like, Final Fantasy 15-esque. And like, imagine that game with full voice acting. You jump into Parasite Eve 1 and then it's fully voice acted. That would be a game changer, man. I just think that game desperately needs a remake, because there's so many cool elements and cool concepts there that if it was modernized and, given real-time action combat, given some voice acting, given some, keep the role-playing, keep the leveling up systems and the inventory management and all that, but modernized and given a serious AAA budget to get out a reboot of Parasite Eve, I just think that would be huge for the genre, because I love subgenres within survival horror. I think that is crucial for getting as many players as possible into survival horror. And last but certainly not least, BioShock. BioShock has to return. All the talk about Ken Levine not being there, regardless of any of that, BioShock has to return. It has to be good. Can it be good without Ken Levine heading the project? Who knows? That all of that shit remains to be seen, but we gotta get it. It's got to release at some point during this generation for my overall goal or the agenda that I'm trying to push here of survival horror returning to prominence, returning to a golden age. This generation, BioShock has to return. Colin Moriarty broke some information a while back about the new BioShock taking place in Antarctica. I think that could be a tremendous set piece for BioShock. And I guess, BioShock's not traditional horror as well, but once again, it's a game that is very, very much rooted in horrific themes across the board. There is a creepy undertone throughout the entire experience. So, yeah, I really do think that BioShock would kind of be the icing on the cake for, this survival horror renaissance. Now, imagine a world where this generation, 9th generation, we get classics. We get like Resident Evils, your Silent Hills, your Fatal Frames, your Alone in the Darks, and then you also get the modern titles. You get your Evil Withins, your Dead Spaces, your Callisto Protocols, your Slitterheads, your State of Decay 3, the Supermassive games, the Alan Wake 2s, and then just to add a little icing on the cake here, being speculative, being hopeful, whatever you want to call it, you get your Dino Crisis returning. You get your Parasite Eve returning. Imagine all of this happening in, let's say, a 7-year window, 8-year window. Absolutely a golden age for survival horror. Maybe not on the level of 1996 to 2005, sure, I'll give you that. I'm not saying the golden age, but definitely a new golden age. But let's even just say we don't get the Dino Crisis, the Parasite Eve, the Fatal Frames. Let's say we don't get those franchises returning this generation. It's still hard for me to imagine that the next, 7 years won't be a fucking great generation for survival horror, especially when you guys consider how starved we were through the 360 era and into the early days of the 8th generation. And it's looking much better right now than it has in a long ass time. So I am optimistic that we're definitely in the second best phase of survival horror ever, regardless if, my lofty expectations are met or not. And even with just what is available, when including, all the games we just went through, along with the indie games, and I think we're in a good spot. So I'm just very, very grateful to be alive, to experience this great new era for survival horror. I'm hyped. It's October. 'Tis the season to get spooky. I hope you all are excited for what is to come with this genre, man. It's great. It's great. I'm really, really hyped. Let me know, what are some of your most anticipated survival horror games in development currently? If there's anything obscure you're on the lookout for, I would very much be eager to hear what you guys are interested in diving into in the future. But that is it for me today. Hope you all have a damn good month and embrace the holiday festivities and play some good ass survival horror classics. Appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.